I will tell you that the majority of grievances that you will see, just like the state bar does an annual summary of the grievance complaints, the number one thing is communication with clients. The second most common thing is basically lack of record keeping and stuff like that. So since you do 5-star representation and all these things, John, my number one thing that I would tell you to do is, and it sounds so simple, right? But like, pick up the phone, send an email, like respond. We all get busy, but that's the number one thing that, like, surprisingly, is people just don't respond to the grievance. Like,
Really?
yeah, it's really odd, but like, you get this, and it's a packet. You get a letter in the mail, and it says State Bar of Texas Grievance Committee, and it's kind of like when the IRS sends you a letter. You should be like, oh crap.
Does the idea of sitting before a state bar grievance panel sound like a fun time? Probably about as much fun as a root canal or an IRS audit, right? But what can we do to help avoid grievances altogether, even from those high-maintenance clients? This week, we're joined by Lisa Gonzalez, a defense attorney who also served as a member of the State Bar of Texas grievance panel. I say served because since we recorded, she's been appointed as Associate Judge of the 268th District Court in Fort Bend County. We'll spend a few minutes going through the grievance process in Texas. Now, you may not practice in Texas like me, but these lessons and these pitfalls are universal. Our focus here is on how to keep attorneys out of these problems, and we'll do that by documenting our work and operationalizing our systems, which allow us to consistently deliver for our clients. And if you haven't listened to episode 6 with Meghan Zavieh, this is a great companion piece to that episode. We're going through the ethics process, but this time it's from the bar's perspective. We focus on elevating our level of service and communication to provide the best source of protection against future grievances. But rather than going through it all here, let's get to Lisa. I'm John Strohmeyer, and this is the 5-Star Counsel Podcast. The market for legal services is shifting, and lawyers who don't adapt will be left behind. This podcast gives you a competitive edge in today's market by sharing the client service lessons you probably didn't learn in law school or in law practice. Let's start the show. Hey 5-Star listeners, before we start, I want to tell you about our amazing sponsor, Smith AI. Smith AI is a virtual receptionist service for small businesses with a specialty in working with solo and small law firms. I signed up with them within weeks of starting my firm because they are affordable for even the smallest solo practice. Their friendly receptionists respond to potential clients in Spanish or English, screen and schedule new leads, and can even take payments. And now they're answering calls 24 hours a day. So even when you're asleep, they're still working. Even beyond the phone, they've got live agents and chatbots ready to capture leads on your website, by text, and by Facebook Messenger. Smith's friendly gatekeepers can staff your front line so you can work uninterrupted. You can finally have the peace of mind that while you're working, you're not missing out on future work. Plans start at just $70 a month for calls and $100 a month for chats. Smith AI is offering a free trial, and our podcast listeners get an extra $100 discount code with promo code 5-STAR. That's FIVESTAR. Sign up and learn more at www.smith.ai. Don't let another day go by. Try Smith AI. Hey, Lisa, thanks for joining me today.
Hi, John. How are you doing today?
I am great. So, Lisa, our chat today is kind of a bookend to our first interview with Meghan Zavieh. And Meghan came on and talked about her experiences defending the ethical issues, ethical quandaries that come up for lawyers. You're here because, one, you're a friend of mine from here in the Houston area, but you have an appointed position with the State Bar of Texas dealing with grievances. And rather than try and butcher exactly what you're doing with them, I'm going to hand it over to you so that you can explain what's going on. And then we're going to kind of unpack what you're seeing from the State Bar side.
Sure. So somebody like Meghan is somebody who I see. So I am on the State Bar of Texas, one of their grievance panels. So the way that we work is we have volunteer attorneys and volunteer members of the public who serve, and together we evaluate the grievances that are filed by citizens and attorneys in the state of Texas. And so they're composed of attorney members and members of the public, and anybody that files a grievance. So in the state of Texas, it can be an attorney, it can be somebody who's related to the case, it can be somebody who's unrelated to the case and just knows that attorney or knows about the case. They file a grievance and it goes through the little system, and then it ends up, and we'll talk about this more in detail a little bit later, but it ends up in front of a panel of attorneys and public members. And so we see what we call like the attorney, and then the respondent, who's normally not an attorney. And sometimes they can be. And then we'll see somebody like Meghan if the attorney hires a defense attorney to help defend them from the grievance process. But we hear it. And so we decide, does this attorney need discipline? Did this attorney do wrong? Did they violate an ethical rule or not? So it's kind of interesting, hearing Meghan, having known her and knowing you, and kind of seeing the process. But we are not deciding, we're not a prosecutor, we're not anything like that. We just kind of are evaluating, do we think that this case has merit? Sometimes we decide punishment if we feel that that's appropriate. Sometimes it goes beyond us. We'll talk about that in the future, but we hear and evaluate whether or not that attorney has violated a rule or an ethical duty to the public.
So if somebody files a grievance, does it come to you are just dealing with complaints and grievances filed in Fort Bend County, which is one of the surrounding counties for Harris County, which is where Houston is.
Right.
You're just dealing with those grievances that show up in Fort Bend County. You're not dealing statewide, correct?
Correct. So there's different districts. And so you're kind of divided into these little areas because the state bar has decided that they want a little bit of background on these people. So they want people that are attorneys in the area and people in the public that may or may not, that typically may know these people in their public sectors or in the private sectors, professionally or not professionally, because they're serving that community. So so there's 2 grievance panels in Fort Bend County. I think there's 2 in Galveston. There's several in Harris County because it's larger. So it kind of depends. It's population based. But there are several of those throughout the state.
So, and because of this, and you're seeing a lot, or how many cases do you typically review? How many grievances are you reviewing on a monthly basis?
Ooh, that is a good question. So we just had a hearing. Well, we do ours on the second Wednesdays of every month. And sometimes so before COVID, they were in person. Sometimes they're via Zoom or by telephone right now. And there's 2 different types of hearings that we do. So there's what we call SDP, Summary Disposition Panel. And then there's IVH, which is an investigative hearing panel. So the IVHs, we typically will have a maximum of 2 in any month because they take a long time. And then on the SDPs, we will have around 5 or 6. Some of those will be carryovers from prior months. And I'll explain why that is in a second. But the main difference between SDP and IVH is going to be investigative hearing is where we're definitely going to hopefully see somebody like Meghan, because that's going to be where we're calling witnesses and we're talking to people and we are truly investigating what is happening. It is a little bit more serious. So if you are an attorney who is listening to this and you get something and it says IVH or it says investigative hearing panel, I would go and grab an attorney or consult with one because it is because you should probably be getting some advice. If it's a summary disposition panel, yes, it's a grievance. Yes, you should take it seriously, but it's a little bit less serious. It just depends on what the person is, who the client is that's complaining. I will tell you, I think that the attorney complaints are a little bit more serious than the client complaints. That's just my.
So do you have any idea of all the grievances filed for attorneys in Fort Bend County? And I would assume this is true for every county. Like, do all of those grievances end up being routed through your panels?
So the short answer is maybe. That's such a lawyer answer.
Lawyer answer, great.
Right. So some of them will get dismissed. So some of them will get dismissed automatically by the state bar. They will say, we don't think this is a real complaint. We're just going to automatically dismiss it from the get-go. Some of them will say, we're going to start investigating it and then they'll dismiss it. Some of them will go to SDP. The IVHs are the more serious ones. So there's 2 panels. So they typically will go to one of us. And so the question is, how does it end up with me versus the other panel? Sometimes it's because there's a conflict with some of the attorneys on our panel, so it'll go to the other panel. Sometimes it just is just luck of the draw. But I will tell you that the majority of grievances that you will see, just like the state bar does an annual summary of the grievance complaints, the number one thing is communication with clients. The second most common thing is basically lack of record keeping and stuff like that. So, since you do 5-star representation and all these things, John, my number one thing that I would tell you to do is, and it sounds so simple, right? But like, pick up the phone, send an email, like respond. We all get busy, but that's the number one thing that, like, surprisingly, is people just don't respond to the grievance. Like,
Really?
yeah, it's really odd, but like, you get this, and it's a packet. You get a letter in the mail, and it says State Bar of Texas Grievance Committee, and it's kind of like when the IRS sends you a letter, you should be like, oh crap, or so,
Yes.
you should alert, like alarms. So those are the things that I think you should open up immediately. And your heart races. It's your profession. It's your life. You should take it seriously, even if it's the crazy client or the client that has nothing to do with the case and it's not taking seriously. Just send a response, like, right. And even if you're late, even if you've been avoiding the client, who wants the update, the weekly update, and you've put them on the back burner for 3 months, like, send a response. And we'll get more into detail in a little bit.
Oh, yes. I mean, ultimately, the reason you're on is not to explain the disciplinary process in Texas, but to really get at what are the mistakes you're seeing that land attorneys in hot water, and ultimately, how can we keep them from getting in that hot water? So I have unfortunately been part of the part of this process. Years ago, I was flying home. I was waiting at Intercontinental Airport, which is the major airport in Houston. And I thought, oh, I haven't checked email in a few days because I was on vacation. What could go wrong? And sure enough, there was an email from the Appeals Disciplinary Board. And my first thought was, this is a fake email. There's no way this is real. And then I started Googling, and no, it was a real thing. And ultimately, somebody had, the sad part is somebody who was less than in full control of their faculties had filed a grievance against me and 7 other attorneys. He lived in San Diego. He thought I was controlling his computer and just doing all of these sorts of things that I couldn't do. But he had decided to grieve 7 different attorneys in Texas for all of this stuff. Then the state bar had taken a look at it and dismissed everything because they're like, this person clearly grabbed 7 random attorneys, blamed them for some of his problems, even though I'd never heard of this person. They was accusing me of all sorts of things that I'd never done.
Mm-hmm.
And so the state bar had filtered it out probably long before you got to it, or you would have gotten to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that happens a lot. And so the thing that I will tell you, and I have learned from being on the grievance panel, is it is very easy to get grieved. It is very difficult to get disbarred. Okay.
That is very good news just to start with. But we're not here for, 1 or 2 star service. We're here to, help people avoid getting in trouble or getting out of trouble as fast as possible.
True. But I think that, so you and I have had lots of conversations about, like, how do you elevate the level of service for your clients, right? If we're talking grievance, like, something obviously has gone wrong, right? You are no longer in the honeymoon phase. Somebody is not happy. And whether that is reasonable or not reasonable, kind of in a grievance process doesn't matter, right? They're accusing you of something. Sometimes it's legitimate. Sometimes it's monetary based. Like, I gave you, these are real facts. Okay. I have given you money and I asked you to hold it in trust, and you did. And we as the panel may say, well, that was a lot of money. Maybe you shouldn't have done that when you were getting divorced because those were community assets. You probably should have disclosed that. So there are different things because we're not limited. That's the other thing is that when you're responding to these grievances, the reason I say you need to be careful and talk to people is because what you put in the response is open for us to examine, which is why when you're doing an investigative hearing, the more you talk, the more ammo you have. And so, or we have to evaluate you. We have asked people about, hey, do you keep notary books? And we have had people say, I don't even know what a notary book is.
Ooh.
Right. So that is not 5-star service.
No,
Okay.
well, at the very least, you're not doing what you're supposed to as a notary. And I mean, I had a notary book for years, but the key is you want to make sure that you, as the notary, have a record. It's not that you need the book. The point is, you, as the notary, can prove that the person who signed was in front of you, and you've checked off the documents they signed when they signed it, and that you've got a separate record of their signature. Which,
Absolutely.
for me, I mean, a few years ago, I moved to my will execution instructions include all the notary instructions and record keeping at the back. So I don't have notary. I still have my old notary books. They're stored in the will vault, but I don't have a notary book that I keep anymore because it's part of my checklist for executing documents. And then at the end of it, I make people sign that, the last thing they sign is like, here, these aren't any choices. This is my record as a notary. But the reason I'm doing that is I'm making sure that it gets done. And we have the process and procedure to know when we're signing documents, print out the checklist and the notary block. So we've got records of it.
Well, and I think that's the perfect segue. So I think one of the key things that can really protect attorneys, whether you're a starting attorney, you're just listening to the podcast now and you've been practicing 12 years or you've been practicing 30 years, is if you don't have policies and procedures in place, like just take 5 minutes a day, whatever time you have, and put some of them in place because they really will help you. So in the form of a grievance, like if it's just, document every phone call that you have with a client, and that not just documented, but like have a system so that when you close out a case or a file or like that goes somewhere. Like I know the state bar in Texas says like you have to keep your files for 5 years. Okay. Like where do they go? Like, is it a digital file? Is it a physical file? Because like you can be grieved for 2 years after your case matter's closed, and anybody can grieve you. Like Aunt Sue, who lives in Colorado, can grieve you on this Texas case because she didn't like the way you treated, her nephew, on any case. So criminal defense attorney, lots of people who are in prison have nothing better to do than grieve their criminal defense attorneys. And then, so we get a lot of those. We get a lot of like the litany of everybody who has been grieved, from all of the attorneys. And a lot of those get written off because, oh, well, he's grieved all of his attorneys. Sometimes that's true, but sometimes there's like legitimate claims where there's no documentation other than the attorney went to court, other than the attorney went to the jail. And I kind of feel like it's been very eye-opening to see how civil lawyers differ from criminal lawyers. So all you criminal lawyers listening out there, we need to do what the civil lawyers do, and we need to document. We need to write down on something that is not a napkin or a Post-it note or a whatever, and put it in a file that says when we did what we did. Because the grievance committee, when you get this stuff, we're going to ask you, like, did you go see this guy? And you're going to say yes, and we're going to say, then prove it. And the civil lawyers are great. They've got timesheets and, like all these lovely little things with perfect timelines. And the criminal lawyers are like, well, here's this contract that my client signed 3 years ago. And then here's these resets and that's really it. We don't document phone calls, and it's really bad. And it doesn't mean that they're not good criminal defense lawyers, because they are, but it's just not as thorough. And so it's been interesting to kind of see what that is.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm going to first start with saying, what do you think is the biggest thing that's surprised you that you see being done incorrectly on a consistent basis? Is it just the not keeping track of contacting clients?
I think the thing that has been most shocking is there's been a lot of stuff with older clients. Okay, so I don't do civil law at all. I don't like it. So that's all you other people. I adore you, and I think you have a lovely place. Like you're like school teachers and nurses, like things that I cannot do. But it's been amazing to me. So like people who have so like with probate law, like there was a case where somebody had a power of attorney, And the person that had the power of attorney was interpreting for the family member who I guess had a coma or something like that, but they were unable to speak. And so this was not an issue related to the panel, but it was a question of how do you trust that that person is actually like advocating or doing the intent of the other person? And so we've had a lot of cases about, is the actual communication between the attorney and the client being effective? Whether it's somebody that's really, really old or somebody that's incapacitated or something like that. And I don't know if it's just a product of us being in these COVID times or what's happening, but it's been a really interesting, like 5 cases in the last year. And it's been just very odd. And then a lot of cases with attorneys with just, I don't know how to say this more sensitively, but just really bad substance abuse or other sort of issues that need to be dealt with, personal issues that either should have been brought to the attention of the client or the court before we ever entered the grievance process. And my advice, since we're talking about 5-star review here, is if that is you, if you are having, like, if you get served with papers, from your significant other that you've been married to for 30 years, and it is debilitating, and you cannot practice law because you are suffering because of this. I'm not saying close your practice, but I am saying, like, maybe you need to notify the courts. Maybe you need to tell them, like, hey, there's something going on privately in chambers, so that they understand when you show up to court a little bit disheveled, they kind of cut you a little bit of slack. Okay. You have communication with your client. I don't know. Or maybe you get a second chair at that point, or you ask friends for help. I think there's a lot of pride that's built up with attorneys, and we don't ask for help when we need to. But there have been a lot of cases where people have had multiple instances of discipline in the past that had not fixed their habits. And we've seen them again and again. There is TLAP that's out there. So I that is out there, and I'm not a weird person, I promise. So I used to always be that person who was like, if you call TLAP, you're going to be on some list. Then they're going to be watching you to see if you're ineffective. No, like, TLAP is actually there to help you.
Right.
And it is truly, truly private. So I feel like if you can get that help, go get it, because it is the saddest thing I mentioned earlier, some of our cases are carryovers from month to month, because sometimes we don't want to discipline somebody if they need help. And if you just go get that help, great. Then we don't need to discipline you because you just need the help. And so there's some lawyers who I have to be careful because of, our rules too. But we had a lawyer who had some issues of the mind, and to make a long story short, we just kind of felt like he should go to a doctor. And he did, like, at our, not, and our things are suggestive. Like, they're not, because it's not a sanction at that point until whatever. He went to the doctor, and we found out he had early onset dementia. And so we were like, great, you should probably consider getting an associate or somebody else to assist you in court. Like, that was just our advice. Like, we're not saying we need to discipline you. We're just saying we're glad you have this information. Do what you want to do with it. Please move forward and in good health and good wealth. Like, it's just interesting. We're not there. When I took this job, somebody told me, it is not my job to disbar attorneys. It is my job to evaluate whether a rule has been violated, and then to determine what is proper. Is it proper to discipline, or is it proper to aid? And I'm a helpful person. You know me, John. I tend to feel like most of the time, a lot of this is law practice management stuff, which goes to 5-star representation. I feel like if you can just put some proper systems in place, then you avoid this whole thing.
Right. I mean, and listening back to this, it's almost, I kind of go back to what I tell people about dealing with the IRS. At the other end of on the other side, the IRS is still made up of humans. They've got rules. They are confusing and hard to follow. But there's a lot of slack in the system. And the reason there's a lot of slack in the system is this is a human-based process, especially for us. And That's what I'm getting is, the reason you're there on that panel is to provide that context or apply the context that's around there to help mediate this. And if that's one way of getting some of that slack to work in your behavior. But the more important thing is disclosing, talking to whomever it is beforehand to say, there's a problem. But even before that, it's setting up your practice so that everything runs efficiently. Because if you don't, you have the chaos that is most practices. I mean, most started calling it this roller coaster of service because you're constantly going from one thing to the next. You don't know what's going to happen next. Every day is just putting out fires.
Mhm.
And that's no way to live. Like some people, there's a certain amount of chaos that some people do like and appreciate, and you're doing different things, and that's okay. But what we don't want is somebody who comes in for a will on Monday being treated in a very different way and for no good reason than the person who comes in for a will on Friday.
Yes.
You should be walking through the same steps every time, even if, and especially because every client is different and they'll have different needs. It doesn't mean that you're not taking off the same steps every time to make sure that you're getting all of what you need done. When I go back to the hotel, there were 21 odd steps to check somebody in. I checked in thousands of people, and just about every time you would take off every 21 of those steps. But there were, as many different variations on a check-in, I mean, just even within the day, because every one of those people was different. But the reason you had the checklist of 21 things that had to happen is so if you got derailed, if they asked you something you weren't prepared for, you knew where to come back to. And you knew, oh, we haven't done this yet. And just having those systems in place to know, oh, we're going to have to do this and this and this. That's what we're looking for, is just regularizing the parts that can be regularized. It's not every client is a unique snowflake start to finish. If they're going to form an LLC, there are still the 5 or 6 things that it doesn't matter who the client is, you're going to do.
Right.
And it's taking those bits that can be systematized in checklist or whatever, just acknowledge, though it's fine that not everything is unique, customized work that's being applied to a client. Filing the initial general denial probably don't, I mean, I don't know. What do I know? I'm not a litigator, but if it's a general denial and it's going to be a 1-page, we deny everything you say, the only thing that needs to change are, the heading at the top and the client name.
Right.
Maybe 2 or 3 other things, and you're generally denying it and you're moving on. Don't reinvent that wheel, and also set it up so you're not doing anything silly.
Right. And I think that's kind of the thing. I think that the other thing I think that lawyers kind of forget about is that, it's all mundane to us, right? Like, and I'm no expert in anything outside of criminal law. So I can only tell you what I know, right? So like you said, like my forms are kind of all the same. I just changed the headers and I kind of changed the other thing. What my clients need from me and what a lot of criminal defense lawyers are guilty of is the communication. So like the one thing I would tell criminal defense lawyers out there, like I would just tell them flat out, is we've just got to pick up the phone. We all get those angry clients that call us in the middle of our day and we see them on the caller ID, or we get the little piece of paper and it's like, Joe Blow called you. And we're like, oh, I got to talk to that guy, and instead, what we could do is we could just know, like, okay, 2 weeks out, I'm, or however, what you're, like you said, just make your system and know, like, every 30 days or whatever, I'm going to touch base and just check in with all these clients. So it's on your terms and you're determining how that conversation is going to go so that you never have that Joe Blow conversation that you're dreading. I think that is key to maintaining that conversation, that communication on your terms, and everybody's happy. And it's not always going to be a pleasant conversation because Joe Blow doesn't want to hear that his offer hasn't changed and he's still got to go to prison for 20 years.
Right.
But I mean, at least he knows you still think about him, right? You're still working on his case or whatever that is for your area of law.
Right. For me, it's almost the opposite. We're sending things to clients and then they're saying, oh, I'll think about this tomorrow, because I'm sending them homework and they're saying, I'll do this next weekend. And so our systems are set up where we're following up with them to say, it's every other week generally, but we're following up to say, are you ready to move forward? That way we're constantly pressing them to move forward, or dragging them sometimes, it may feel like. But the point is, we know what that cadence is. And we have certain clients that, if they wanted less communication, they'll tell us and we'll back off if they ask for it. But there are a few that say, we'd like weekly updates. And even if it's not so much, just knowing and recognizing we've got to meet that client who may want a little bit more communication. It doesn't hurt us to send the once a week email of, here's where we are. Mm-hmm. We need this from you, or we're doing this week.
Right. Yeah. It's really interesting. And then you just see some people, like the lawyers, just being honest, they get really big egos. And so we get lawyers who grieve other lawyers because they just didn't like each other. And then those are the really long, thick packets they should be summary. So I should tell you a little bit of that. So when you get a grievance and you have to respond, you should give us as much documentation that pertains to the case as possible. So yeah, generally the more information, the better. So we've had summary disposition panel packets that are like 10 pages. Great. We've had several that are thousands of pages. If you're going to do one that is 1,000 pages, please provide a summary because it's helpful, because we are volunteers. It just makes it easier for us. But it's been very interesting being on the panel. You and I talked. I didn't realize that I knew as much about grievance stuff as I did until we were chatting about this. It's weird. But like you said, we are human, right? And we don't want, because it's your livelihood. So, okay, so that's the other thing. Good tips, quick tips. If you get involved in this, like, we are human. We don't want to be mean to you. Talk to somebody like a Meghan Zavieh, because I do think that you should get some advice, because each panel is different. Our panel right now, I think, is very human, and we are very big on taking personal responsibility. We have had some people who come in there who were like, nope, I did nothing wrong and you've got to prove it. And that has not gone well for them. We've had other people who have come in there and been like, I am terrified. I am terrified. This is my livelihood. I have my kids. I have my grandkids. And it has been something very minor. Like, it has been like the smallest thing, but they are so stressed out because it's their first grievance and all of these things. And you feel for them because anything, like, they don't know what's going to happen, so don't go in there thinking, oh, this is no big deal. I've got this. Like, this is serious. It can be serious. Talk to somebody, but we are human at the end of the day. Now, I'm not saying go in there and be like, yeah, I did it all. Like, just give me my CLE and let me be like, don't do that either.
Yeah.
But be humble, but also be human. I think that, I do criminal defense work, so I'm big on people taking responsibility for their actions. So I think that and especially with our public members are very concerned about protecting people. They're very concerned about how do they make sure that what happened with this one attorney doesn't happen to anybody else. And so I think that's the whole purpose of having a panel of public people and attorneys, is that it's a group of people deciding together, did this, because attorneys get bogged down in, well, was that really negligence or was that a breach of contract? So the public members help us kind of bring it down to reality. And I think the state bar does a really good job of appointing a mixture of people with good dynamics. It's very interesting.
Lisa, I think that's a great place to leave it. Where can people find out more about you, or on the onlines?
Oh, on the onlines, I am Legally Lisa. So I am www.legallylisa.com if you want all the W's. I am at Legally Lisa ATTY on the socials. So that is me. I'm around. I'm 281 Law Lisa. I'm all the things. So yeah, I'm a big dork. So if you find me on the socials and you have Harry Potter or Legally Blonde or Leslie Knope, Galentine's Day's coming up. So yeah, hit me up.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being with us.
Okay. Thanks, John. This is blast.
Thanks so much for listening. You can find more info on us and get your free white paper on client service at 5starcounsel.com. You can get in touch with me at john@fivestarcouncil.com. If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe wherever fine podcasts are found and leave us a review wherever you can.